You don't have free will, but don't worry, says Sabine Hossenfelder. It'll take a while to unpack all the BS in this video. Good morning, everybody. So, it's going to be a long one, but it might be worth your time. If you like the kind of work that I do here, feel free to support the channel. Links to all of that in the description. You don't have free will, but don't worry. You know, I find that a lot of the people who make these ridiculous statements follow it up with something that's supposed to soften the blow. It's as if they knew they were saying something so ridiculous, something so controversial that it's probably even very hard for them themselves to believe. But you know, they're pushing it out there. I'm not sure why. So they have to kind of, well, soften the blow. It's no big deal, guys. Don't kill me. Let me explain. Really? It's not. It's a huge deal. If we don't have free will, the implications of that, once you could convince everybody that we don't have free will, everybody, the implications of that will be, I don't even want to get into that, what that really means, right? But don't worry. This is going to be fun.
Today I want to talk about an issue that must have occurred to everyone who spent some time thinking about physics, which is that the idea of free will is both incompatible with the laws of nature and entirely meaningless.
The idea of free will is incompatible with the laws of nature, or what she means, I think, is it cannot be explained by physics. Really? Something that is immaterial cannot be explained by the science, the study of matter. Yeah, no shit. Can you explain reasoning, the process of reasoning, reason, by using physics, Sabine? Can you do that? Now, maybe you can. But maybe you cannot. And just because you may not be able to explain something immaterial by means of a study that studies matter, that should come as no surprise to anybody. And even if you think you could find some kind of a way to approximate something like an explanation for an immaterial thing, using material, matter, that still doesn't mean that you justified it. It's an immaterial thing, honey. And she also says, what else does she say?
I know some time thinking about physics, which is that the idea of free will is both incompatible with the laws of nature and entirely meaningless. I know
the idea of free will is entirely meaningless. Keep that in mind.
That a lot of people just do not want to believe this. But I think you're here to hear what the science...
We don't want to believe this. Why? Because we have free will, right?
Science says. So I will tell you what the science says. In this video, I first explain...
Hey kiddos, let's play a game. Science says. Science says stand up. Science says sit down. Science says clap your hands, kiddos. I'm sure you get the point. Science says you don't have free will.
Explain why free will does not exist, indeed makes no sense, and then tell you why there are better things to worry about. I want to say ahead that there is much discussion about free will in neurology, where the question is whether we subconsciously make decisions before we become consciously aware of having made one. I am not a neurologist, so this is not what I'm concerned with here.
So apparently, and I haven't read the studies, but there have been some studies conducted that seem to show that certain actions, before we actually do them, we're not actually aware of that. Somehow they've determined that we become aware of them after we already did them, right? Now look, anytime scientists say something and I go and read one of them studies that supposedly says the same thing, I come out very disappointed. And I've done this on and on and on and on and on and on and on. I'm actually thinking about talking about some studies concerning viruses and how much bullshit is in that science, right? So I don't give a shit what scientists say, okay? I mean, I'm not going to say I don't give a shit, but I question everything that scientists say. It doesn't mean anything to me to say science or scientists say something. But let's consider those studies without reading them. Just because you could perhaps show that certain actions are subconscious, okay? Well, that assumes a whole bunch of things. That assumes that you understand the brain completely, which we don't. That assumes that the brain is the only thing that's in control of our bodies, which, I mean, you guys remember that video about the headless chicken that lived for a year after having its brain severed from its body? I mean, if that's true, then there seems to be a little bit more to us animals than just our brains, insofar as deciding, if you will, or controlling what happens with the body, right? Plants don't seem to have brains, at least not anything approximating a mammalian animal brain. And yet, they're intelligent. There are signs of intelligence when it comes to plants. Look it up. Right? So a brain is not necessarily an explanation for everything insofar as our actions or will or whatever, right? And even if it were, we still don't understand the brain completely. And just because you can show that maybe certain actions seem like there's no free will, even if I grant you all this stuff that I already didn't, just, even if I grant you all these presuppositions, just because you could show that maybe certain actions are done without our will, that doesn't mean that we don't have any free will, period. You know what I mean? And besides, science cannot prove anything anyway.
I will be talking about free will as the idea that in this present moment there are several futures which are possible.
Now look, vernacular is one thing. We talk the way we talk because it makes sense. We understand what we mean. But this is a little bit different, right? We're getting very technical. We want to say things that are strictly true, right? We're going to hold you to every single word you say because, well, you're a scientist. Listen to what she says.
This is not what I'm concerned with here. I will be talking about free will as the idea that in this present moment there are several futures which are possible, and
in this present moment, in this present, there are futures, several different futures in the present. That doesn't make any sense. There is no future. The future will be, we believe there will be a future, but right now, it's only the present. There is no such thing as possible futures, definitely not right now. There's only one future. And if anything, we will determine, plus a whole bunch of other factors that we don't have control over, that will determine what the future will be. But right now, there is no future, definitely not different futures right now. It doesn't make any sense what you're saying. And it's a strawman argument because that's not what free will is. Now, I agree there are different definitions of free will, wishy-washy, but we're mainly concerned with, and she is too, because she's an atheist, I guarantee you that. We're concerned with libertarian free will here, okay? And look, one quick side note about atheists. Sadly, and look, hashtag not all. These YouTube atheists, quote unquote scientists, they reverse engineer reality. They're ideologues. The reason why, in my opinion, a lot of them have a problem with free will is because it's attached to this idea of religion. Not all religions believe in free will, but majority of Christians, for example, do, right? And because they are anti-theists, they have a problem with theism. They're materialists. They will attack everything that, or just about everything that is just by default connected to religion, right? And then they'll reverse engineer, despite their better judgment. They will abandon reason, okay? They will abandon free thinking, free will. They will abandon all of that, right? Reason, free will, free thinking. How can you have one without the other? You can't, Sabine. You can't. Let me take another sip of my coffee. They will abandon all of that in order to, quote unquote, prove something, right? They're just mad at God because they don't have God. And because they don't have God, they don't make any sense. They're incoherent, right? Look, in vernacular, just day-to-day talk, yeah, that's fine, but we're above that. We're on a different level right now, right, Sabine? Not only is there no future right now, there are definitely no possible futures, different possible futures right now. The now is all we have. And that's not even the definition of libertarian free will, as I stated. The definition is that it's the assumption that, well, first of all, you have the ability to, well, you have free will, right? You can choose what you do. You're in control of you, right? To some degree, at least. And given the chance, if that were possible, right? The concept of libertarian free will posits that given the chance, you could have chosen otherwise. You could have made a different decision, right? But this would require, to prove that, it would require having a time machine, right? If you could somehow make that decision again, or go back in time to the same juncture where you made that decision, right? Free will assumes that you could have made a different decision. That's it. It does not say that there are different futures, different possible futures right now, because that doesn't, in a strict philosophical sense, that doesn't make any sense. Sabine, you need God, girl. You've given up reason. And free will is reason. But you've given all of that up to what? Convince us of something? Convince yourself of something?
Your free will plays a role for selecting which one of those possible futures becomes reality. This, I think, is how most of us intuitively think of free will, because...
And another thing about possible futures, just because you may want to have pizza or ice cream, that doesn't mean that the ice cream parlor or the pizza shop is going to be open, right? Like, we're not in control of everything. That doesn't mean we don't have free will. Duh.
It agrees with our experience of how the world seems to work. It is not how some philosophers have defined free will, and I will get to this later. But first, let me tell you what's wrong with this intuitive idea that we can somehow select among possible futures.
So she admits we have a strong feeling, intuitive feeling, right? That free will exists. And yet, she has convinced herself that it doesn't, despite the fact that there are these very, very strong forces that are telling her otherwise. She was somehow able to convince herself that she is correct. Wouldn't that require free will?
Last week, I explained what differential equations are, and that all laws of nature which we currently know work with those differential equations.
All laws of nature. Oh my God, she's gonna get super technical or something. Maybe not. Again, she's talking about laws of nature. She's talking about the physical world, right? Free will is immaterial, right? It's It's like studying cats by looking at dogs.
These laws have the common property that if you have an initial condition at one moment in time, for example, the exact details of the particles in your brain and all your brain's inputs, then...
Okay, I don't really understand this math. I didn't watch the video, but basically what she's saying is that if you know what all the conditions are, you're going to be able to predict the outcome, basically, right? And there are certain laws that encapsulate that.
And you can calculate what happens at any other moment in time from those initial conditions. This means, in a nutshell, that the whole story of the universe in every single detail was determined already at the...
No, it doesn't.
Big Bang. We're just watching it play out. These deterministic laws of nature...
She's saying we're passive observers. Everything is just going to happen and you have no input. Like, how bunk is that, right?
Apply to you and your brain because you are made of particles.
Okay, so this is materialism, right? Matter is most important and everything follows from that. But that's just one philosophy. There are different philosophies. There's idealism, which says basically the opposite. Says the mind is the most important, right? So, if there is a disagreement, okay, it's an ongoing debate. It's been going on forever. Not everyone is a materialist, in other words, right? All you have to do is not grant her materialism, and that's it, right? You don't have to agree with anything she says, because everything that she says is predicated on materialism. She acts as if materialism were the ultimate truth. It's her belief. But we can take her belief and carry it out to its logical conclusion and just see how, see how legit it is. Which isn't to say that idealism is correct, but good luck trying to prove that that's the less rational conclusion. But this whole idea that we're just particles, right? And physics determines everything, right? Physical relationships, matter determines everything. Well, how does matter account for reason, Sabine? Can you use particles and matter to show me that reason or the process of reasoning exists? Can you do that? And if you can, well, then you still lose.
And what happens with you is a consequence of what happens with those particles. A lot of people seem to think this is a philosophical position.
Materialism is a philosophical position, which isn't to say that it's not based in science. Of course it's a philosophical position.
Call it materialism or reductionism and think that giving it a name that ends on ism is an excuse to not believe it.
That's a strawman argument. People debunk materialism because it's very easy to debunk. And they don't believe in it because it doesn't make any sense. It makes stupid assertions. It contradicts itself all the damn time. It's incoherent. It's nonsense. People don't just dismiss it because it's called materialism, because they have some other ism that they themselves ascribe to. It doesn't make any sense. This is just a strawman argument. She rejects the fact that there are very, very strong arguments against materialism. Right? She's saying, oh, you don't agree with me just because you're a brat. Right? This is, wow. Wow, Sabine. Wow.
Well, of course you can insist to just not believe reductionism is correct.
Oh, really? I could choose not to believe reductionism? But I thought I had no free will. This is how incoherent this shit is, right? It leads you to saying dumb things. If you believe this shit, it leads you to say ridiculous shit that she is right now.
But this is denying scientific evidence. We do not guess. We know that brains are made of particles.
So?
And we do not guess. We know that we can derive from the laws for the constituents what the whole object does. If you make a...
Right, but that's, again, assuming that matter is the most important, and everything follows from that. If you could debunk materialism, none of this makes any sense, right? Her presuppositions are wrong.
Claim to the contrary, you are contradicting well-established science. I can't.
Right? Well-established science. Just because there's well-established science about what's happening in the world right now, it's established, but is it correct? If it's correct, why is it so easy to debunk?
Prevent you from denying scientific evidence, but I can tell you that this way you will never understand how the universe really works.
Okay, so wait. She just said I have the ability to reject scientific evidence. Wow. It sounds like I got free will, no?
So, the well-established science. I can't prevent you from denying scientific evidence, but I can tell you that this way you will never understand how the universe really works. So...
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, for all of you who have said that God is a woman, you're absolutely correct. Not just a woman, but this woman right here. She claims to know how the universe works. Are you kidding me? Like, the amount of arrogance that some of these people have. And look at her anyway. Like, this isn't part of my argument, but this is me appealing to intuition yet again. Pay close attention to this woman. Look deep into her eyes. Why does she have this, like, robotic, dead look about her? Now, maybe it's due in part to the fact that she's reading cue cards or, a teleprompter or something. Maybe. But she just has this dead look in her eyes, man. She looks soulless. Right? Maybe it's just a matter of perspective. Maybe it's where she's coming from. She's rejected the immaterial, the supernatural, right? The soul. Free will. Could it be that that's why she looks like a robot? Or maybe she rejected all those things because she is, in some sense, a robot. Pay attention. But to claim to know, to understand how the universe, what is universe? Well, everything that exists, right? To claim to know how everything works. I mean, come on. It's like an appeal to your own authority. And it's ridiculous. Right? Like that in and of itself should make you want to dismiss anything else she has to say, right? Where's the humility? Where is, there's no room for debate. Science is settled. I am God. This is scientism. People think they're God. Some of these people. Because they rejected a higher authority. They think they are it. This is why atheism is so dangerous. Right? Because, and why it leads to totalitarianism. There is no higher power to answer to. I am God. I do as I want. Whatever I do is moral, right? Subjective morality. All these things are intertwined. All right, let's see what else Mrs. God has to say.
The trouble with free will is that according to the laws of nature that we know describe humans on the fundamental level, the future is determined by...
The laws of nature that describe humans on a fundamental level, right? Materialism. It's all material, material, material. Oops. All we have to do is debunk materialism.
The present. That the system, in this case your brain, might be partly chaotic.
The system, your brain, is, you're basically a robot, right? You're a computer. Listen to what she says.
Does not make a difference for this conclusion because chaos is still deterministic. Chaos makes predictions difficult, but the future still follows from the initial condition. What about quantum mechanics?
Okay, We're going to have to listen to all of this again because she makes some interesting points.
Because determined by the present, that the system, in this case your brain, might be partly chaotic does not object does. If you make a claim to the contrary, you are contradicting well-established science.
So basically what she said up until this point is that, we are nothing but particles, and particles are governed by laws of physics, which could be observed scientifically. And if we know all the preconditions, we should be able to predict the future. We should be able to predict everything according to her worldview. But the reason why we're unable to predict everything is because there's chaos. Now, what is chaos?
I can't prevent you from denying scientific evidence, but I can tell you that this way you will never understand how the universe really works. So the trouble with free will is that according to the laws of nature that we know describe humans on the fundamental level,
that's it, right? What I just said.
The future is determined by the present. That the system, in this case your brain, might be partly chaotic does not make a difference for this conclusion because chaos is still deterministic. Chaos makes predictions difficult, but
So this is her out, right? Because she cannot predict the future. No one can, right? Not all the time, 100% of the time. She says, well, there's this thing called chaos. She's got an out. Because look, if I have no free will, you should be able to, at some point, anyway, to prove that, you should be able to predict the things that I do, the things that I may say, right? Can you? Oh, no, we can't because there's chaos. What's chaos? Let's look up chaos. Chaos. We're only concerned with the scientific term, right? In physics. Chaos is behavior so unpredictable as to appear random, right? So it's not really random, it's just unpredictable. Owing to great sensitivity to small changes in conditions, right? So we basically cannot predict all the conditions. We don't know we cannot observe all the conditions. We don't know what all the conditions are on all different levels, right? Thus, behavior appears random because we don't know what all the inputs are to be able to predict it, right? That's what this says. It's not random. It just appears random. But there is an explanation. We just don't know what it is because we don't know everything, right? Sabine just said she knows how the universe works. So she should be able to predict everything, right? And yet she can't. Hold on a minute. Didn't she just refute herself? And how is it that you came to this conclusion that you can theoretically predict everything when you were never able to what all the preconditions are, to know what all the preconditions are, right? So how can you, this is self-defeating. You'd have to know what all the preconditions are in order to be able to predict what the future is. She claims to be able to predict the future, but she can't because she doesn't know what all the preconditions are. So if you cannot observe cause and effect, in other words, to the most finite level possible, right? How do you know the cause and effect is merely material? You can't demonstrate that it is, but you say that it is. And the reason why you can't demonstrate it, you say, well, it's just due to chaos. It's because I don't know what all the preconditions are, physically anyway, in physics, in the material sense. Yeah, but if you don't know what all the preconditions are, then how did you come to this conclusion that everything is determined and that you could predict it when you can't predict it? Like, you're just going in circles here, or I'm going in circles trying to understand what it is that you're saying. You don't have, in other words, you don't have all the data available to be able to make the conclusions that you made. And this becomes clear because, well, you can't predict. You say it's determined, but you can't predict it. Oh, right, you can't predict it because you don't know what all the conditions are. So how did you, I'm sorry to be repeating myself, I hope this makes sense to you. But how did you come to this conclusion that you can predict stuff when you're never able to predict anything, really? Where did you get this idea from? Right? And then chaos in physics is also the formless matter supposed to have existed before the creation of the universe, right? Formless matter supposed to have existed. So matter that has no form, it's just, it appears random. We don't know what it is. It's just out there in space. All the molecules, all the particles were already there, right? When they talk about something from nothing, well, it's not really nothing because there was something there. It just didn't make any sense, right? And then all of a sudden, Big Bang, right? Or something like that. And all this formless matter became the beauty that is this universe. And all the regularity and all the predictability of the universe, right? All these patterns and regularity, at least to some degree, right? Like these wonderful things that are, everything is something now. It was just a big old blob or a collection of blobs or nothing really recognizable in any way. Randomly, right? Became all this wonderful thing. How does materialism explain that? Right? Wouldn't you need a mind to be able to organize and order everything? How did you get order out of chaos? For no reason whatsoever, without any input from any agent, right? There couldn't have been a physical agent, like some huge giant forming this matter into all of this wonderful stuff we experience today. It couldn't have existed because, granted, assuming that this is what happened, right? Because everything, before everything was something, when everything was still, quote unquote, nothing, it was formless. It didn't make any sense. Right? So there couldn't have been a physical being forming the formless stuff into something. It had to have been an immaterial mind. Right? Well, what is that, ladies and gentlemen? Right? The only way to explain that is by rejecting materialism. Materialism cannot even explain the beginning of the universe. It just happened on its own. It was formless, and then it had form all of a sudden. Regularity, you got order out of chaos, right? And it was all just somehow predetermined. When it didn't make any sense, somehow it started making perfect sense. And it was all predetermined to be so, and it just happened all on its own. How do you get order out of chaos, right, in this context, without an immaterial mind? Because everything that is material was nothing, right? How? Well, obviously God. Whatever you think that is, well, I mean, so long as it fits with our idea of the universe, then you're probably on the right track.
Does not make a difference for this conclusion because chaos is still deterministic.
Chaos is deterministic. How?
Makes predictions difficult, but the future still follows from the initial condition.
Right? This is her out, chaos. It's her out. We can predict the future. We should be able to, but we can't because there's chaos. It's so weak.
What about quantum mechanics? In quantum mechanics, some events are truly random and cannot be predicted.
Okay. Let's let God tell us what quantum mechanics is. Whatever.
Does this mean that quantum mechanics is where you can find free will? Sorry, but no, this makes no sense. These random events in quantum mechanics are not influenced by you, regardless of exactly what you mean by you.
Well, the science, okay, when it comes to quantum mechanics, is not settled. There's a huge debate raging, and I'm not going to pretend to understand quantum mechanics because I haven't even taken the time to look into some of these studies, right? If they ever happen, right? All I see is just words on some webpage somewhere. But Scientists are using quantum mechanics to prove God. They're using it to prove free will, supposedly. I wouldn't know. But she's acting like the science is settled. Pete, this is a huge debate going on right now. Like I think it's the double slit experiment where particles behave differently if they're being observed, right? But she says you have the observer, whatever that is, she says, you have no input on what's going on. But the double slit experiment, if I'm understanding it correctly, says the exact opposite. So this is just like science says, sit down, kiddos, because science is talking.
Because they are not influenced by anything. That's the whole point of saying they are fundamentally random. Nothing determines their outcome. There's no will in this,
No. According to what we just looked at, the definition of chaos insofar as physics is concerned, it's not random. It only appears random. Like, isn't she the physician or scientist or whatever she proposes to be? Right? Insofar as chaos is concerned, it's not random. We just can't explain it because we don't know what all the preconditions are. But it's assumed, right? The theory is that it's all very regular. We just don't know all the inputs. That's all. And again, if we don't know all the inputs, then how can we prove that this action this will be the reaction to all these actions when we don't even know what all the actions are, right?
Not anybody else's. Taken together, we therefore have determinism with the occasional random quantum jump, and no combination of
random whatever, man. This is just gobbledygook.
These two types of laws allows for anything resembling this intuitive idea that we can somehow choose which possible future becomes real. The reason this idea of free will turns out to be incompatible with the laws of nature is that it never made sense in the first place. You see, that thing you call free will should, in some sense, the idea of free will turns out to be incompatible with the laws of nature is that it never made sense in the first place.
Right? Free will never made sense in the first place, even though you have this intuition that tells you, right, it makes sense to all of us, but it never made sense in the first place. How can you, on the one hand, say that we have all this very, very strong intuition where all of us believe this, unless we get brainwashed by these self-proclaimed gods, right? You can't tell us otherwise. We're convinced. It makes sense to us. Right? No, you literally have to brainwash people into believing something else, right? Even though they have no free will to believe it anyway, somehow. Make that make sense. But you literally have to make people go against their better judgment with this so-called science, brainwashing, to be able to reject free will. But it never made sense in the first place. When, like, you're the one not making any sense. Like, this lady, I mean, all atheists, all materialists are walking, talking contradictions.
Place. You see, that thing you call free will should, in some sense, allow you to choose what you want, but then it's either determined by what you want, in which case...
It's determined by what you want. Do we need to look up determined? What does it mean to determine something? Huh? Decide, right? To control. Determine. To cause something, right? Control, decide, regulate, direct, rule, dictate, govern. So listen to what she says.
First place, you see, that thing you call free will should, in some sense, allow you to choose what you want, but then it's either determined by what you want, in which...
It's determined, right, by what you want. You choose, you control what you want. That's what she just said. You decide what you want, but you have no free will. This lady's incoherent.
In which case it's not free, or it's not determined, in which case it's not a will.
What? That didn't make any sense to me.
Now, some have tried to define free will by the ability to have done otherwise, but that's just empty words. If you did one thing...
That's actually the definition, right? Finally, she gets to it. First, she strawmanned the position. I don't know why she would do that. She didn't make any sense in the first place anyway, right? Saying that possible futures exist right now. Different futures exist in the present. Like, that makes any sense. But yeah, it's the possibility to have done otherwise.
There's no evidence you could have done something else because, well, you didn't. Really?
Well, yeah. Like, how do you prove that without the shadow of a doubt, right? You need a time machine or something like that. Just because you didn't do anything different is because time is linear. It's not like time just branches out and there's different realities. It doesn't work that way. Right? This is the point, that there's only the present. This is what you do. You can't go back and do differently, nor can you go into the future or any of these possible futures. That doesn't prove anything. This is just the way things are.
There is always only your fantasy of having done otherwise. In summary, the idea that we have a free will which gives us the possibility to select among different futures is both incompatible with the laws of nature and logically incoherent.
You're logically incoherent. You cannot select between different futures. There's only one future, which doesn't mean it's determined. We don't know what it is. Can you predict the future? No. You're the one making these ridiculous claims that you cannot substantiate either, right? I don't have a time machine to be able to prove that free will exists, and you cannot predict the future, all right? So we're even Steven. But at the very least, I'm coherent. You're not, right? My explanation for how the universe works, without, sticking my nose into science, even just trying to be logical, it's a lot more plausible than yours. And on top of that, we all have great intuition that agrees with, so the evidence is on my side. Just because I cannot scientifically prove the free will exists, well, neither can you disprove it. Right? So, but we have to step outside of science because science cannot tell us everything. Right? Logic, reason, that governs science. It should anyway. Govern science. Shouldn't that be primary? Well, it cannot be in the materialistic worldview because, explain to me how particles give us the ability to reason. Explain that one to me. And if you do, you will have proved free will.
I should add here that it's not like I'm saying something
scientifically
new. Look at the writing of any philosopher who understands physics and they will acknowledge that.
So she just poisoned the well, basically, which is another fallacy.
But some philosophers insist they want to have something they can call free will and have therefore tried to redefine it. For example, you may speak of free will if no one was in practice able to predict what you would do.
Redefine free will, she says. No. Not to say that there aren't different definitions, but first you strawmanned it, then you gave the most relevant, in my opinion, definition. And now you're saying that because there are certain objections to what you're proposing, that means they're redefining free will. Listen to it again.
Is certainly presently the case. Therefore, try to redefine it. For example, you may speak of free will if no one was in practice able to predict what you would do.
That's not the definition of free will. That's just the test of your hypothesis. But you want to reject that test because you cannot prove scientifically the things that you believe to be true. So it's another strawman argument. That's not the definition of free will. I'm not saying that it's not some kind of a fringe belief. No, maybe it is. I don't know. But that's just a test of your hypothesis, of your theory, which you fail. It is what it is. But in order to still hold on to this illusion, you have to strawman that position.
Is certainly presently the case that most human behavior is unpredictable, though I can predict that some people who did not actually watch this video will leave a...
Yeah, most human behavior is unpredictable, right? Well, why is that, honey? Because we have free will. That's why it's unpredictable.
Comment saying...
You claim to know how the universe works. And you know that you just by looking at the particles and understanding the laws of physics, you could predict the future. Except you can't predict the future. Thus, maybe that's because you hadn't considered all the inputs. Because you just offhand rejected things that are immaterial, right? Or the supernatural. Right off the bat, you rejected it, right? Well, no wonder you're lost. No wonder you're not making any sense. Because you rejected, well, reason, right? You rejected reason. How can you prove reason by, if you're saying everything, the only thing that we're concerned with here, right, as materialists, is that which follows from particles bouncing into one another and the laws of physics, then how do you use that to explain the process of reason? And if you can't, then reason doesn't exist, which shouldn't come as a surprise, seeing as you're not able to reason. Look at that dead look in this woman's eyes.
They had no other choice than leaving
No
their
soul.
comment and think they are terribly original. So yeah, if you want, you
I'm getting a very strong Stepford Wife vibe here. Anybody else?
can redefine free will to mean no one was able to predict your decision. But of course...
That's a straw man. That's not the definition of free will. That at least not any definition that we're concerned with, that most people are concerned with, right? It's just a test of your bullshit hypothesis.
Of course, your decision was still determined or random, regardless of whether someone predicted it. Others have tried to argue that free will means some of your decisions are dominated by processes internal to your brain.
Anybody else notice? This is not an argument. I get it. Like the tightness in her jaw. It's like she wants to say something else, but is forcing herself to basically go against her intuition. There's a lot of discomfort there. Not just a dead zombie look in her eyes, but like something it's like talking like this. It's difficult, right? I chalk that up to cognitive dissonance.
And not by external influences. But of course, your decision was still determined or random, regardless of whether it was dominated by external or internal influences. I find it silly to speak of free will in these cases. I also find it unenlightening to have an argument about the use of words. If you want to define free will in such a way that it is still consistent with the law.
Also, I have the free will to define free will as I please.
Of nature, that is fine by me, though I will continue to complain that's just verbal acrobatics. In any case,
very, very, lots of tension and very, very uneasy person, insofar as I can tell. So, and this is why, right? The cognitive dissonance. She has convinced herself that free will doesn't exist, which would basically entail in the face of the fact that we have very, very strong intuitions that say free will tells us that free will does exist, right? It would seem that it would take a lot of free will to be able to convince yourself that free will doesn't exist. So while she says it doesn't exist, the way she talks to us, it's as if it did exist, right? She seems to believe that we can convince ourselves to believe certain things, right? We have the ability to believe or not believe certain things, which implies we have free will. She talks to us as if free will existed, while at the same time telling us that free will doesn't exist, and seemingly requiring free will to be able to reject free will despite her very strong intuition that tells her free will does exist, right? This woman is so much conflict. I think the cognitive dissonance manifests itself in just how she's not at ease, right?
Regardless of how you want to define the word, we still cannot select among...
how you want to define the word, right? You're in control of, you could define words however you want, because you have no free will.
Several possible futures. This idea makes absolutely no sense if you know anything.
I agree. Several possible futures. Okay. Of course it doesn't make any sense. You're not making any sense.
About physics. What is really going on if you're making a decision is that your brain is running a calculation, and while it is doing that, you do not know what the outcome of the calculation will be.
Right? Your brain is running a calculation, but you don't know what the outcome is going to be. Do you know what the outcome is going to be? No? So you can't predict the future. Neither can I predict the future, right? Right, because we have free will.
Because if you did, you wouldn't have to do the calculation. So the impression of free will comes from our... You do not know what the outcome of the calculation will be. Because if you did, you wouldn't have to do the calculation.
Right, if I did, then that would be an argument for your side, that it's all determined, because we can predict it, and we don't have to do calculations. The simple fact that we calculate, right? This brings me back to my point of reason. And this isn't my argument. This has been used for many, many years to debunk. I don't know if materialists even address this argument, if they just ignore it, right? Reason. Well, what is reason, right? The process of reasoning. It's considering the data and calculating in your brain. Looking at this proposition or that versus that proposition, all various propositions, and then considering potential conclusions that follow from these propositions, right? It's weighing the evidence and coming to a conclusion. If we have no free will and everything is predetermined, then there can be no such thing as reason or the process of reasoning, right? But she just said that there are calculations in our brain. We're actively calculating things, right? So she says reason exists. But in order to be able to calculate, in order to be able to say that we have reason, we could come to reasonable conclusions, you have to have free will, right? So to say there is no free will, you invalidated reason. You rejected reason, which is why you're not making any sense. That's why you're contradicting yourself all the damn time. You're incoherent. You're saying shit that doesn't make any sense. Because by rejecting free will, you rejected reason.
So the impression of free will comes from our self-awareness that we think about what to do, combined with our inability to predict the result of what we are thinking.
If these people truly believed, this is the cognitive dissonance, if they really believed that we have no free will, they would change the way they talk. They wouldn't talk to you as if you had free will. They would just say, well, it's this, and they should be able to, when questioned, to point to the specific particle that's making you do all these things, right? This particle bumped into that particle inside of your brain, and that's why you did this or you did that. Or you had the illusion of doing this, right? Now, I'm not expecting her to talk like this all the time, but at least provide some examples, right? Don't talk to me as if I had free will, because what you're showing me is that you believe I have free will. You don't actually believe the thing that you say is true, that we don't have free will. Because if you truly believe that, obviously you would talk to me differently, right? If I believed that the sky was pink, I wouldn't refer to the sky as blue, right?
Before we are done, I feel like I must add here a word about the claim that human behavior is unpredictable, because if someone told you that they predicted you'd do one thing, you could decide to do something else. This is the rubbish argument, because it has nothing to do with human behavior. It comes from interfering with the system you are making predictions for.
Right? You're just a robot.
It's easy to see that this argument is nonsense, because you can make the same claim about very simple computer codes. Suppose you have a computer that evaluates whether an equation has a real valued root. The answer is yes or no. You can predict the answer, but now you can change the algorithm so that if you input the correct answer, the code will output the exact opposite answer.
Just because maybe somehow you can use a computer program or a computer that is pre-programmed to act a certain way. Just because you could draw some kind of similarity to the human brain, that doesn't mean that we're pre-programmed computers. But if we are, well, who programmed us? Wouldn't you need a mind to program us? I don't think that would still debunk free will, but if in some sense we are programmed, kind of like a computer, what minds program computers? What mind programmed all of us? And yeah, we are programmed to a degree, obviously, right? When you say something hurtful to us, right, it makes us hurt. Not in a physical sense, right? We feel things. Yeah, we're programmed to react to certain causes. There's generally going to be a limited number of effects, not the same, but they're going to be somewhat predictable effects to these various causes, right? If we're so programmed, isn't it minds that program? Don't you need a mind to program a computer? And again, if all the matter in the universe was nothing, basically, right? It didn't make any sense. It was chaos. Then it couldn't have been a material being encompassing this mind that programmed everything, right? It had to be immaterial.
So yes if you predicted no, and no if you predicted yes. As a consequence, your prediction will never be correct. Clearly, this has nothing to do with free will, but with the fact that the system you make a prediction for gets input which the prediction did not.
Okay, so we could run this experiment, right? Say we're having a debate. You're saying no free will. I'm saying yes. And I say to you, okay, well then predict what I'm going to say. And I'm going to narrow it down to yes or no, two different options. So if there's no free will, your prediction, the longer we do this, your prediction rate should approximate 50%, right? The more we do this, the closer to 50% your prediction rate should be. If it's just determined, right? Are you able to predict it? You won't be able to predict it, right? And then you'll say, yeah, but that's because you know that when I say yes, you're going to say no. So in a way, I am determining what it is that you're going to say. Okay, well then, don't let me not hear your prediction, right? Just tell me what your predictions are, right? The first time you're going to say yes, the second time you're going to say no, the third time, so on and so forth, right? Don't let me hear your predictions and then have me, answer the question without me reacting to, without you predetermining what I'm going to say, right? Your prediction rate, I would expect it to be at least 75%, right? After we will have done it 1,000 times. But no, the more we do this, the more it's going to approximate 50%, right? You can't predict it. If you're saying it's determined, you should be able to predict it. That's not the definition of free will, you not being able to predict, but that's the burden of proof you're putting on yourself by saying that everything is determined. Can you meet that burden of proof?
Count for. There's nothing interesting going on in this argument. Another objection that I've heard is that I should not say free will does not exist because that would erode people's moral behavior. The concern is, you see, that if people knew free will does not exist, then they would think it does not matter what they do. This is of course nonsense. If you act in ways that harm other people, then these other people will take steps to prevent that from happening again. This has nothing to do with free will. We are all just running software that is trying to optimize.
People will take steps to prevent that. Well, not the first time you do it. Oh my God.
Our well-being. If you caused harm, you are responsible not because you had free will, but because you embody the problem and locking you up will solve it.
Well, that is the problem if you were somehow able to convince people that there is no free will, right? There's no accountability. If you convince everybody there's no free will, then it's easy to imagine how, well, we wouldn't even need a judicial system, right? Why? It wasn't what you did, wasn't your fault. Don't we already have insanity plea, which, lessens the sentence for any criminal, right? Now imagine if everyone was convinced. I'm not talking about them spewing bullshit, being in chaos, experiencing cognitive dissonance where they really don't believe the things that they're saying. No, I'm talking about programming people, right? Taking their souls away from them, turning them into Stepford wives like Sabine over here, and convincing them where they truly believe that there is no free will. There's no accountability. People will do as they may, right? Subjective morality, all of this is entailed, becomes a reality. People could do whatever they want. How are you going to judge them? Right? Just because you could throw these criminals in prison after they will have committed a crime, well, the initial crime, the impetus is still going to be there. And you somehow putting them in prison, while at the same time saying that it's not their fault, well, that's very difficult to justify.
There have been a few research studies that supposedly showed a relation between priming participants to not believe in free will and them behaving immorally. The problem with these studies, if you look at how they were set up, is that people were not primed to not believe in free will. They were primed to think fatalistically. In some cases,
So those studies over there that go against what I'm saying, we're going to throw those out.
Example, they were being suggested that their genes determine their future, which, needless to say, is only partly correct, regardless of whether you believe in free will. And some more nuanced recent studies have actually shown the opposite. A 2017
But these other studies over there, they're better because they agree with me, right? Science!
study on free will and moral behavior concluded, we observed that disbelief in free will had a positive impact on the morality of decisions towards others. Please check the information below the video for...
Did they really convince these people free will doesn't exist? No, they probably never did. They just said, oh, okay, free will. Like, I mean, I'm not going to go read the studies. It's not that important to me. It doesn't... it's not really an argument for whether or not free will exists, right? This is just additional considerations, the implications of whether or not free will does or doesn't exist, or whether we believe it does, right? Did they truly convince those people that free will didn't exist? Probably not, right? Sabine herself is not convinced, right? Look, she just proved my point. She's not acting. She says she doesn't believe in free will, but she is not acting as if free will didn't exist. So it doesn't matter what those people said they believed, right? They acted as if free will did exist. It's really that simple.
Or a reference. So I hope I have convinced you that free will is nonsense and that the idea...
Wouldn't that require me having free will, Sabine?
Deserves going into the rubbish bin. The reason this has not happened yet, I think, is that people find it difficult to think of themselves in any other way than making decisions.
No, it's because you're incoherent, you contradict yourself. Clearly, you're dealing with some serious cognitive dissonance. Your arguments are fallacious. Like, it's just... your worldview doesn't make any sense. And it's the fact that we have free will, which guarantees us the ability to reason. There's still enough people left in this world who haven't been pre-programmed like you, like a robot, even though you haven't yourself fully succumbed to the programming either, because clearly you're in chaos. There's a ton of cognitive dissonance going on there, as evidenced by the rubbish that's coming out of your mouth, okay? People have not accepted your arguments because they don't make any sense. And the people that haven't been brainwashed by you to be zombies, to accept everything on faith, like you want them to, right? If you disagree with me, you're not a scientist. I know how the universe works, right? Trust me. Accept the message. Science says, sit down, kiddos. Pay attention, right? Yeah, you really have to become a zombie to accept the shit that he's saying. But because we have the free will to be able to reason, we reject your bullshit. But you don't want us, and I'm not saying she's doing this consciously. Clearly, she's in conflict. But she has to take away our free will, which takes away ability to reason, right? If you reject free will, you are rejecting reasoning, the ability to reason. And once you are no longer able to reason, you're a fucking zombie. Well, then you accept the shit she says because it sounds good or whatever.
Drawing on this non-existent free will. So what can you do? You don't need to do anything. Just because free will is an illusion does not mean you're not allowed to use it as a thinking aid. If you lived a happy life so far using your imagination.
Right? Just because it's an illusion, that doesn't mean you don't get to use it, right? Like, how credible is this? How sound is this, right? I don't know if she said it in this instance, but a lot of the times when people say, well, but think of the moral implications of what you're saying, these people will say, well, I'm first and foremost concerned with the truth, right? That's the argument. I'm sure she would say that if she hadn't already. Or, well, why is she doing this? Even though the moral implications are potentially disastrous, right? Well, it's because it's the truth. For sure she thinks it is the truth, which is why she's motivated to push the truth as she sees it. And yet, at the same time, someone who seems to want to push truth is saying you could use illusions if you want, right? Well, isn't that another contradiction? Shouldn't we, right? Doesn't truth imply morality, entail morality? Shouldn't we speak the truth, right? Shouldn't we act in accordance with truth? Wouldn't that be moral, right? This woman, she has no moral foundation. It's just like she contradicts herself. It's just an illusion, but, you know, you could fall prey to an illusion. It's okay. It's okay to live a lie. I'm so interested in truth, which is why I'm telling you this, but it's okay to live a lie, right? Cognitive dissonance, projection.
Free will, by all means, please keep on doing so. If it causes you cognitive dissonance to acknowledge you believe in something that doesn't exist.
Right? This is a projection. She's the one with cognitive dissonance, as proved in this video many times over.
I suggest that you think of your life as a story which has not yet been told. You are equipped with a thinking apparatus that you use to collect information and act on what you have learned from this.
Okay, so the illusion of free will is meaningful. When in the beginning she said, free will is an illusion and it's meaningless. And now she's saying, well, it's still an illusion, but it's meaningful, right? Talk about incoherence, cognitive dissonance, nonsense, right? But hey, she's God. I'm just a fucking homesteader from Ecuador, right? Who doesn't know shit about anything. So, Sabine, you've been completely and utterly refuted by a country bumpkin in Ecuador, all right? Good going, God. Thanks for watching.